to the cloud. All right, and I'm going to share my screen, portion of my screen anyway. And all right, hopefully you folks are seeing a gimpy, no insult intended to the wonderful program GIMP, but gimpy logo of TFT Rocks. So welcome to Tools for Thought Rocks. This is a community of people who are interested in all of the different words that describe the things that we're working on: digital gardens, second brains, whatever, tools for thinking. Don't have a good term for this yet, but the group is intended for creators of the tools, makers who are using the tools to get their work done. It's not just for people who are coding them from scratch the way that Paul and Charles are. We've had a lot of people talk about their usage of them and just show how they use them to get other work done, which is ultimately why we're building these things. There's a lot of different, a lot of different things we talk about: tips, techniques, usage, but today we're going to be talking about spatial canvases. And to give a quick introduction, some things have changed over the last month since we last met. The Fediverse is popping off, as the kids say, and Boris has been doing some work to get Tools for Thought set up in the Fediverse. So I'm going to let you chat about that for a second, Boris. Go ahead.
Absolutely. So we've avoided having a website or a dedicated chat server for a while. Basically, Luma has been the main thing for us. We did buy a domain to make it easy to redirect to it. And what it looked like is that things are happening in a very quick way with ActivityPub and Mastodon servers, the protocol underneath. So I set one up with the Tools for Thought.rocks domain. So we finally have actually a community space that really can be collaboratively done between all of us, that isn't like maintaining a single website or something like that. So this is a community service. You can sign up for an account and use that as your main, an alt, as an experiment, or anything else that you like. You can also browse the local timeline without signing up, so you get a sense of other people that are posting there. If you already have one of these accounts, go ahead and tag things Tools for Thought Rocks if you want to target things at this community, or more broadly, we try and actually encourage Tools for Thought as a general tag for people putting stuff out there. And with new features in Mastodon 4, you can actually, in fact, subscribe to hashtags. So you'll be able to see stuff wherever you are in the Fediverse. In the Luma community, and we'll make sure it's in the follow-up link as well for the email that comes after this, there is a special invite link. We're leaving it just for people who participate, attend, are members of this community for now. Once you're in, you can invite other people. So you can create invite links and do that yourself as well. If you can flip to the next slide. So Luma, wanted to quickly put this here as well. There are some things changing with Luma that's coming up. We've been very, very early users and tried lots of different things. If you actually go to Luma/Tools for Thought, that's also the sort of admin account. And it looks like they're going to refactor things to take out a lot of the community things that were less useful. I don't really like that it's gated and then you have to join, even though it's an open community. So ideally, this will actually transform very soon into something that's more of mainly a shared calendar, which is the main thing that we use, and the email and kind of newsletter follow-ups that we do already for things. So good changes from our perspective happening there. Next slide. So the other new thing that we have that we've had for a while, but the impetus of some of the Mastodon stuff and documenting things led us there. So YouTube event recordings, will continue to do that. Notes and resources at notes.toolsforthought.rocks. Ideally, this is a collaborative sense-making graph. It's powered by Logsec right now. It's checked into GitHub. An interesting task that I might prompt people to do is do a PR with a page for their name, if you're GitHub friendly. You can also just post, comment, link, and I'm happy to make a page for you. If you'd like to maintain this without GitHub skills, I also have a shared Dropbox folder that anyone can edit it. And then myself or some other folks who are more GitHub friendly can help get that prompted in there. Michael Gartner, shout out. Thank you for sending in a PR with some changes. There are some features in LogSec where you can do some queries and other things like that. So we'll see where we get to, and ideally have a very rich linked backlog of all of these events and the people that participate. We also finally started an open collective for pooled funding and projects. So right now, Fission, my company, employs Jess, pays for the Zoom account, the paid Zoom account that does these things. This is a community effort at the end of the day. The costs aren't super high. The Mastodon account has some costs. We're already at $15 a month in recurring. If you want more interesting meeting series and interesting experiments, please go ahead and check that out and support it, especially if you are going to be using the Mastodon server as your home base. In the future, maybe pooling funds for some interesting projects. We'll see.
Cool. Thanks, Boris. And thanks for all the work that you've done to set this up. And I love how Boris has been leading the way in community stuff for a long time. And in light of a lot of the recent changes, has been really kind of pushing things forward on the Tools for Thought Rocks community and other places on the web. So like really appreciate you making post Twitter spaces for us to be to hang out and enjoy our times together. So cool. The other thing that we do, the main thing that we've been doing with Tools for Thought Rocks, aside from all the stuff that has been getting set up, has been a monthly speaker series, and you are at it. We've been doing this for a little over a year right now. You can find the record of the past ones on YouTube. If you'd like to go back and watch some of the previous recordings. We're now in episode 3 or part 3 of our Spatial Canvases series. We've had, this was the third month in a row where we've been talking to creators of Spatial Canvases, trying to learn more about that medium, as a spatial canvas is just like a spreadsheet, is a medium that's good for things and it's not good for other things. And currently we're in this sort of global exploration where there's a lot of different companies that are implementing spatial canvases for all kinds of things. We're sort of a global search of the possibility space of what spatial canvases are good for, which is pretty exciting. People are using them for everything from design tools to programmable interfaces or programming interfaces, and you know, tools for thought, whiteboards, cork boards. There's all sorts of interesting uses for this medium, and I think it's fun to get together, hear from people who have actually been working with them for in some pretty serious detail and have been doing design explorations, finding out what works, finding out what doesn't work. So we'll hear from 2 of those folks today. The final thing is like just logistics during the talks. Feel free to unmute yourself. We have a small enough group here that that usually is not a problem. If you'd like to ask a question, you can also ask the question in the chat. The chat tends to be a pretty active back channel during the actual talks. And if you're not comfortable with unmuting yourself, feel free to ask in the chat, and myself or Boris or someone will chime in and ask your question in case Charles or Paul are not watching the chat. The format of this is going to be about each of Paul and Charles will have about 20-25 minutes worth of something to say. I'll let them set the ground rules if they would like to like hold questions to the end or interrupt me as I go. When they start their talk, they can let us know about how they would like to do that. And then we'll have time about 20-25 minutes after the talk to ask questions and engage in a conversation, which should be fun. Without further ado, I'll introduce Paul and we'll get started. So Paul is working on a tool called Kosmik. They've been working on it for about 3 years. Kosmik is, I'll let him describe it to you, but it's a tool for thought, yes, but they're building an entire infrastructure to help us with thinking, and that's I think where we're really talking about things today. He's been using some interesting underlying technology and working really hard to get that underlying technology ported to a variety of different platforms. So that's been a lot of work getting things working on iPad and iPhone and Mac and then now web earlier this year. Paul is part of an accelerator in New York City called the BetaWorks Think Camp. So he's one of the prestigious companies that have been invited into that. And I'm sure a lot of great stuff has come from that. You've already heard from some folks over the last year that have been participating in that over the last three months. So looking forward to hearing more from that. Yeah, and I think that's about it. Paul, I'll let you take it from there.
Thank you so much. That's quite the introduction and quite flattering. So yeah, I can. If you have questions about the Betterworks FinCamp, I'm not one of the organizers, but I'd be pleased to tell you more about that. The companies have been announced today, so that's kind of cool. I'm sure you know some of them. You must at least know from Gordon Brender, Subconscious, and Noosphere protocol and applications. We share a lot of concepts and goals. I think it's a very interesting program, and it has been very good. So to tell you a bit more about Kosmik, so we've been working on Kosmik for 3 years. It's a spatial canvas, but what it kind of sets it apart, the twist is that it's a native app for the iPad and the Mac. And it's now we position it as a web browser because that's what people are actually using it more and more for. They use it to kind of get that new browsing experience. If you look at the browser as an object, as a tool, it's been quite the same since Mosaic or Netscape. Like you have a window, you have tabs, you have too many tabs, you have groups of tabs that we call bookmarks or that we call reading lists. You can also, you cannot reuse content. It's very hard to extract content in a web browser and to reuse it in context. You have to download it on your desktop, which is a very old metaphor, or to keep it somewhere else, or you have to use a third-party service. If you have a web page on the Spatial Canvas, which I'm going to show you now. So I have 2 demos for you. I have two versions of Kosmik. So if you have a web page directly on your canvas, you can browse the web right here. And if you find something interesting, you can just highlight it, extract it, and begin to create what we call cards. What's super cool in Kosmik is that beyond Kosmik, we also, beneath Kosmik, sorry, I'm French, so I may use the bad words sometimes. Beneath Kosmik, we built a decentralized graph database that we call Foundation, which is based on IPFS. So everything in Kosmik is decentralized peer-to-peer. And Kosmik gets its name from what we call the Kosmik object, which is a way to store data as objects. So for example, let's say I create a text box here, or I create a web page. That text box has 2 layers of storage. The text itself is stored in IPFS, but what we call the polydata, which is the position of the text on the card or the size of the text in height and width, is stored somewhere else. And so once we open that database to the general public, once we open source it, you'll be able to use the same SDK as we do, but you could say, hey, I'm going to build something that's more kind of like Logseq, for example. I want to build an outliner. And if you use Foundation SDK, you'll be able to display the same text, but you can say, I'm going to ignore the spatial and the size polydata, but I'm going to add one that is order polydata. And so you could display the text in the outliner and in the spatial canvas, and it's going to be in sync. So that's kind of cool. So if I give you a demo of Kosmik, let's say, for example, that we create a web page here. Oops, sorry, it seems a bit slow. I'm going to use that version. So here, for example, let's say I create a web page. Yeah, that's better. I'm going to go, for example, look for information about Douglas Engelbart. So I have a web page here. I'm going to show you the other demo afterwards. I can just click on that. I can make it bigger. I can then, I'm sorry, I have a very bad network connection, and it seems to have a bit of an influence on Kosmik. Oops, let me just stop sharing my screen and relaunch that. I'm sorry, I'm at home without internet and I'm using my phone modem, so it may not be the best experience. Yeah, it seems to work better. So let's do that again. So let's say I have that web page. I'm going to do some research on Douglas Engelbart, for example. I now have that web page directly on my canvas. And what's super cool is that I can create my kind of reading list directly here. So I can click on that link, for example. And if there's something that interests me about the ARPA, for example, I can zoom in a bit, click on the link, and just open the link in another card, for example, or in the same card. It's very, very easy. If I want, I can just extract the image, for example, and put it on the canvas like that. Oh, I have a big demo effect, sorry. Sorry, if you have questions while I kill and relaunch all of the process, the demo god is not kind with me today.
No worries. Paul, you were saying that the emergent behavior that you've noticed from your users is that they've been using it as a web browser, like a spatial web browser. Yeah. Like how did you realize that? Like, tell me more about those conversations. How did you come to that? And how are you sort of planning for the next little space of time to further support that?
Yeah, so what happened is that because Kosmik is a native app on the iPad and on the Mac, we had access to web components very, very easily. And so we just built a web browser inside the canvas as kind of a weekend project just to try it out. And we put that into one of the Kosmik versions that we sent out, and users immediately began to use that. And they were like, oh, okay, super cool. I can drag out a link. Oh, I want to reuse an image. I can drag out an image. If there's a text that interests me, I can even like have a web page pin on the left. I can select some text and extract it on the canvas. You can also browse in full screen mode. Then you can create what we call a card. So, oh, now I can build kind of my own small websites, which is something that I'm going to show you in a minute. So basically, we just created that web card object and people began to use it and to say, this is how I want to use the web. This is how it's meant to be. I don't want to be sucked into a tab. I don't want to have to switch between tabs. I want to have several pages layout on the same space, and I want to be able to compare them. And so what I was saying is that it completely changed your kind of behavior and the way you are relating to the web. For example, if you want to learn more about the mouse, you can just click on the mouse link, drag it out, and boom, you have the mouse page directly on Wikipedia. And now you can just create a link between those two pages, and they can work together. So it's a very, very nice way of browsing the web, of working, of knowing also where you've gone. Because you have a trail of your research. And so if I'm doing research on Douglas Engelbart, maybe at some point I'm going to do some research on the NLS or on the mouse, and I can just, piece together some content on a card that I can then rename and call Douglas Engelbart, and that I would be able to share with you at a later point. So this is why it's been, Kosmik has been kind of finicky. It's because what I wanted to show you, which is the new stuff we've been working on, is that we are also going to have, it's probably going to crash. So it's working. I've been working on that since yesterday. We have a multiplayer mode in Kosmik. So the idea is that you'll be able to browse the web together. And so we've built a multiplayer mode in Kosmik on top of IPFS. Everything is peer-to-peer. Everything is decentralized. So that's kind of the ethos of the product. It's a spatial canvas with a web browser where you can extract elements, put them together in context, collaborate, and you can have as many boards as you want. It's very, very easy to work in Kosmik. So for example, here I have my to-do list, and here I can even have a Notion pages that I can browse to see other tasks, or I can do some competitive research. It's very, very easy. Everything is on the canvas. Everything can be shared. Everything can be published. So this is one of the last things I wanted to show you in the demo, which is that you can publish stuff in Kosmik. So for example, here I have that whole thing. That whole kind of web of research on Tool for Thought's history. So I have Vannevar Bush, I have an article about the Dyna book, I have the As We May Think page on the Atlantic Journal page, and I have an article about Douglas Engelbart. What I can do here is I can bring you in that canvas and we can work together, or I can send you a link. I can click on the link here, copy the link, go into another browser, paste the link, and it's going to load the full Kosmik web page here, and you can browse. By the way, you see Kosmik working on the web. We have a web version. And what's interesting is that sometimes, or I would say most of the time, what we want to do when we share something is not to be together in the same canvas. Like if I'm a creative person, if I am a product designer, if I'm a designer, usually I will have that kind of mess of material that I've used to create something. In Kosmik, you can click on an object because of the data structure we have beneath. Copy the link to that object precisely. Paste the link to that object, and you have only that object in the browser, and you can collaborate on that object precisely and share that object only. And you can then click on the text. You can do that with any object on the board, and Kosmik will readapt and render it correctly. And so here we can collaborate on the text, for example. So that's kind of cool. The other thing is that the publish mode in Kosmik is based on transclusion. So I'm sure everybody here is kind of familiar with the idea of transclusion, but the idea is that if I share that link with you, that public link, and you open it in Kosmik and you have a Kosmik account, you can just reuse my object and put it into one of your boards. And this is going to create a transclusion, so a duplicate of that object. And each time I update that object, you are going to get those updates. So it can completely changes the way you collaborate, because instead of having spatial canvases where we work together, or we work, I would say, as a team, synchronously, you can patch together a compound documents where you take a card from me, you take a card from Jess, you take a card from Boris, and you create a new board. And in that board, you have an aggregate of cards that are transcluded from 3 different sources, but that are still going to update in real time. So that's kind of what we do.
Nice demo. So Paul, that brought up a ton of questions for me. I'm sure other people have the questions as well, but that was an amazing speed run. Like, wow, there's a lot there. So yeah, feel free to raise your hand as you think of questions. I've got a couple to start us off. I'll go in like kind of reverse order. So you talked about transclusions, being able to grab a reference to something from someone else and then update it in your own space. And then those changes flow back to the original object. How do I, as the creator of something, pull in changes selectively as opposed to like having my stuff getting deleted by somebody when I didn't want that to happen?
So you mean, for example, if we were sharing a canvas?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what I would advise you to do, which is really the way Kosmik is meant to work, is if we go back here, is that you keep that kind of very finicky assemblage of pictures and threads that you've created, and you only share the specific object you want to collaborate with me on. So even if I do that to your precious card, I've only destroyed that precise object. The other thing that is really nice in Kosmik is that we have infinite versioning because of our data structure. So you can always rewind and restore, and you can duplicate. We would like to have transclusion in the versioning, but that's very hard to do. So you can duplicate a version to restore an object to its previous state. But yeah, that's kind of one of the challenges that that we are going to encounter, which is how to organize collaboration. One thing that we are also working on is we are going to have video conferencing on the Spatial Canvas directly. And so if you give me 1 minute, I would really like to show you one thing that should work and that should be cool if it works, which is when we browse together. But that's really like Paint is still very, very wet. We've had it has been working since yesterday, but Kosmik seems to be in kind of a mood. So I'm not sure that it will work, but so I think that it's quite, someone mentioned FigJam and Figma in the chat. I think it's quite bizarre that FigJam and Figma have been existing, Figma more precisely, for about 10 years now. And we still don't have a collaborative web browser. Like it's very hard to browse together. Like we have tools to collaborate in the web. Like we have Google Docs, we have all of those stuff, but to collaborate in the browser, like to do some research together is very hard. And so I saw someone mention IPLD. Oh, that's you, Jess. We do not use IPLD. We created our own system. So, but it's very cool, and we would like, so for example, I know, Boris, I know. But I have a good news for you, which is that we are really it's kind of, so it won't be a secret anymore, but we want to use UCAN as our identification mechanism in Kosmik. And so we want that open source database to be ready next year. And to tell just a bit more about that, like Jess has mentioned that we've worked a lot on creating several implementations of Kosmik. We've done something really crazy that nobody should try at home. We've written a complete backend in Swift. Nobody should do that for several reasons. And so when we created Kosmik, the first version, we really wanted to have it on the iPad because we feel that the Spatial Canvas on the iPad feels really at home. It's a very good concept. It works very well. It's very nice to use. But we wanted it to be completely decentralized and offline first and encrypted and peer-to-peer. So we took IPFS and we cross-compiled it. And we have the node that's running locally on the iPad. That was very hard. That was very long and kind of crazy. And so after that, we wanted to have a new implementation for the web. So we actually created a new implementation, and that one also took us some time, and it's in TypeScript. So now what we are doing is we are working on a single implementation of the database in Rust that's going to be cross-compiled in WebAssembly, and that's going to work everywhere. That's what we are going to open source. And yeah, we've rewritten something that's not IPLD for a reason, which is that, to be honest, when we tried it, and we may have been at fault here, IPLD was too slow for what we wanted to do, but we need to reevaluate. But at the time, this was our justification. Yeah.
No, there's definitely more to talk about in terms of the data layer. Boris is trolling you.
Yeah, I saw that.
Not trolling you, but goading you at the very least. So a couple of questions about the shared browsing, Paul. Like, how did you? So two things. if anyone has gone down this route to try to build a spatial web browser or a spatial canvas where you can throw browser windows, you'll know that you run into a couple things. One of them is iframes and the cross origin policy. Like, how do you guys get around that? I'm curious. And then I got another question after that one.
So how do we do that? I must admit that going the native route completely erased the problem of cross origin. However, it does not erase the problem at all in a decentralized PWA. And so that's something we're still working around. So if you want to use Kosmik strictly on the web, because it's a web browser, we do not advise you to do that. But if you want to use it in Chrome, you are not going to get live previews of the web page. But as soon as you download the heavy clients, it works perfectly. I would also advise you to run the heavy clients because you'll get better performance with IPFS. And it's just way nicer. So that's how we kind of worked around the problem. And you had another question, but I forgot it. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I'll ask my last question. Hopefully someone else will have questions because otherwise I will keep asking. It looks like Daniel does actually. I'll hold mine, Daniel. And I think my question, I saw your chat, Daniel. I think my question is the same as yours. So go ahead.
Yeah, so it's kind of a question and kind of a sort of problem statement of just how challenging it is to get browser synchronization. You have to basically you have to pick some place to run the browser, and then you have to proxy all of the events back and forth. And the question is where and how. So, tricky.
So what, I'm sorry, maybe I got that wrong. What do you mean by that exactly?
So where do you, presumably when you're running a browser, you're not going to invent something out of whole cloth. You're going to use Chromium or something like that.
Or WebKit. We're using WebKit.
Yeah. So that's got to be hosted somewhere. And there have been different approaches where I think we saw a demo a while back about where that was hosted on a server, and we were proxying the changes back and forth from the server. There's variations where you might run it on a client and then proxy the events. So just curious as to your thinking about that.
So everything that we can do locally, we do locally. So everything is running on device, first and foremost. Then if you speak specifically about the browser window itself and how we refresh the research, so what we do is each time you load your universe, so each time you go into your board, we reload everything in the background. So we have lazy loading, we have previews that kind of make that transparent. And if you want to, I don't know, if you want to, another approach we've been trying is because the updates, so my understanding is that decentralized system consume bandwidths basically. And so what we're thinking is that we could send more updates and we could refresh those on a time-based basis, or we could also refresh those kind of permanently, but that's not great. That's not a good user experience. So for now, it's quite manual. You go into the board, we refresh. Kind of like when you open your browser and it restores all the tabs. That was the easiest route. But everything is running locally, everything is running on device. And honestly, that's way better and more comfortable. And good for the user too.
Other questions for Paul? All right, Paul, I'll ask, while people are thinking, I'll ask my other like 2 standard questions for people. You kind of answered one of them already that I've been asking every Spatial Canvas session. And so Charles, this is your preview of what you'll get asked as well. Which so the in working with Spatial Canvases over the last couple of years, what have you noticed Spatial Canvases are really good for? You talked about browsing, web browsing. So what is inherently just better in the medium as you've been working with it and as users have been working with it, and what sucks? What have, like, when you try to do this in the medium, it's just not good, and it feels like maybe trying to build a paint program out of a spreadsheet, right? Like, so you can do it, but should you? Probably not. So yeah,
I think that there is one thing, which is that the goal of Kosmik, if you kind of try to imagine like 5-10 years from now, the idea behind the Spatial Canvas is that it can be a place. Like it mimics the way your brain, or at least it mimics the way your brain works better not perfectly, but better than a desktop with hierarchical file folders or folders infinitely nested into one another. So the goal with Kosmik, for example, is to say that because we spend 80% of our days looking at a browser, because we use, I don't know, a text editor, we use a lot of stuff in the web, mail, calendar. That's the best way, that's the best route to begin to rebuild the desktop and the environment in which we live as digital creatures. The Spatial Canvas is also very good because whichever devices you look at, you display it onto, sorry, English, French thing, it's going to look great and the same. Like if I open Kosmik on my iPad and on my Mac, the cards are the same size, the zoom position is the only different thing. So it's very easy to have very consistent content. So I think it's also better for accessibility. I think it's way better to mix content, to have an image next to a drawing, next to a text, next to a sticky note, next to a 3D image, a 3D object, etc., etc. I also think it's very, very, very good for exploratory work, which is exactly what we are pushing with Kosmik as a browser. I also think it's awesome for asynchronous collaboration because you can leave stuff. So for example, let's say I invite you into my home and I leave stuff on the table. They are going to be exactly as I left them. And when I come back, I'm going to see where you've put them. So the Spatial Canvas is very good for that, which is why I think that the most powerful combination that you can create is Spatial Canvas plus versioning, with a really good versioning where you can rewind the events to see what happened in which order. And to I do feel that if that's done well, the necessity to have a messaging app like Slack, for example, would decrease dramatically. And that's something that we've seen in some of the tests we've conducted. And that's also why video conferencing was one of the top requested features in some of the Kosmik type forms that we created over the course of the last year, which was very unexpected for us. Also, what they suck at, I think they can become tedious to maintain. The balance in a Spatial Canvas that's very hard to strike is what should be manual and what should be automatic. Like, do you want the content to kind of, rearrange itself? Or do you want it to be strictly manual? And you cannot have both. That's what's very hard. I think one of the best approach I've seen, and that's a product I truly admire, is how Muse balances things between having nested boards, which acts kind of like folders, but also kind of can also auto-resize themselves when you get out of them. That's a very interesting thing. Muse is, I think, the only hierarchical spatial canvas, and that's a very interesting approach. I think they do suck at that. They do suck at how do you organize the content in a fast way, in an automatic way. How do you jump between different contexts? Like, those are different animals. I think you have to look at them as really a way to explore, compare, and have a parallel vision or a top-down vision. That's kind of the best thing I think they are good at. I do think, though, that the metaphors can be multiples. Like the good thing with the Spatial Canvas is that it can replace your desktop because it's a place, but nothing precludes you from displaying those objects as a list, as a grid, as something else. And that's why we also created our own data structure. And that's why I made the parallel with someone that would create maybe a logseg front end while also using Kosmik. That's how I think we need to think of those tools. We need to think of apps, like that's one of my main culprits when we discuss document-oriented systems versus app-oriented systems. Document-oriented systems are not meant to kill apps. They are meant to say the focus should be on the content and not on the container. That's the main distinction I see. So what I mean by that is that we need to think of apps as views with different tools to express different optionalities of an object. That's how we need to think of that. And that's why we need to have a common data structure and then create new front ends on top of that. I think Boris wants to tell me.
The next thing that you'll be proposing is that we have user-owned portable data. Blasphemy.
Exactly. But I think we agree on all of that.
Absolutely. Yeah. No killing. No, it's lovely. I just know all of the pain that we are going through separately. And so, but we also need parallel evolution and trying different things, right? I'm both reminded of your interface. So for me, I see pace layering, which is a general concept that has been explored a lot lately in the interface. You showed a very fast layer. Oh, I've just heard of this new term, IPLD. Let me go search it. Let me go grab a bunch of things. Let me put some things together. Let's grab some resources. Oh, now I'm going to slow down one layer a little bit, and I'm going to do some reading and some annotation. And so pace layering literally as your interface of working with it, right, of discovery to possibly more curated, collated, summarized artifacts or other things like that. And then also as well of the pace layering that we're currently going through. We've had a discussion around new programming language theory and languages and a bunch of things that are coming. There's, you know, we all know that ML and AI has gone from incredibly difficult to, oh my God, there's a component I can just drop in 18 months.
Which I think is kind of a problem, by the way. But
it is. It's my example of saying, if you or an organization, if any individual or an organization had spent the last 18 months trying to make this work on their own, they would have carried all of the cost of the pain, time, and expense of that. Whereas a lot of us just get to go, cool, I just waited for 18 months in this particular problem space. And now I get to reap the rewards of that. I don't have a plan for getting around this. It's an observation that I'm making that's super fascinating. Dimi had a question. Do you want to say it out loud, Dimi?
Yeah, sure. I was wondering what's the most weird or unusual or unorthodox type of use case that you've seen so far with Kosmik?
Oh, that's a great one. We've seen many things. I must say that people trying to use remote logging software to have several computers actually available in Kosmik probably tops it. Using Kosmik as kind of a control tower with, you know, not virtual machines, I don't know how to say that. Basically, a distant login in Kosmik with kind of that, you know, views inside views ad infinitum was, I think, the weirdest and the coolest one. The other thing I would think of is, yeah, I think that was really the best one. Otherwise, people just piecing together like 100 web pages together and being like, oh, it's kind of slow. And I'm like, yeah, it can become slow, but not 100 pages at normal sizes, but, you know, like cropping them to create a mosaic of web pages.
Like
that's really cool and very well. Another very weird stuff we've had, people expanding web page infinitely because you can just recite them infinitely and being completely lost and not seeing the content anymore. That was kind of fun. But the weirdest part, I would say, is people remote logging into different computers from Kosmik and using Kosmik as kind of a supercomputer. And I think that's the best thing, putting sticky notes below the virtual screens. And you're like, okay, this can really become maybe a new desktop. That was very fun. And I just want to maybe add something about what Boris said. I completely agree with your approach, and I do think that, and I think you may have gotten some hints of that in the last few months. I think we need to work together. We've been working solo for too long. The problem is that Kosmik was very hard and it was very long to build it. And we've had a lot of roadblocks. We basically had to do that part of the road kind of alone. And now we are ready. And it was way too long, I admit. But I've announced publicly that Foundation is now another product that has its own life and that's going to be open source. And also, total disclaimer, like we are a VC-backed companies with investors. And so it was also a big job for me to convince all of them independently that the good thing was to open source what they consider to be maybe the best asset of the company. If you look around, like there are a bunch of spatial canvases, none of which does what Kosmik does specifically, but still, but nothing does what we do in the backend, or at least not completely. Like it's not the same.
It's all hard. Like
Yeah.
bottom line, it's all hard.
Yeah, and so it was very hard, but I must admit that I was pretty surprised. And so now everyone's aligned. It took 6 months. Everyone's aligned. We showed to people why it's good to open source things. So we have the green light. Kosmik will remain closed source and will remain a for-profit product. Foundation, the database beneath it, and everything we've done from the cross compilation of the IPFS node to make it run on mobile devices, to the transclusion layer, to the way we address cryptographic problem will be open source, because we also think that it's the best way to protect what we've done.
Awesome.
Can I pay you today? / how else can we help?
Yes.
Can you what do today? Sorry.
Can I pay you today?
Very soon. We need to speak about that. The Kosmik is not paid yet. We are going to announce paid plan in January alongside the release of the multiplayer mode. And just very briefly, I'm going to show you the demo of what I wanted to show you that we did yesterday. So that's spatial browsing on the canvas, synced between 2 different accounts through IPFS and through the decentralized system. So that's what I wanted to show you, but unfortunately it was too finicky. And we think it's going to be very cool, and it opens a lot of other possibilities. But yeah.
Very nice. That's awesome, Paul. That is cool. I think I really enjoyed, we'll wrap this up here and then hand it over to Charles in just a second. There's in asking that same set of questions, what's been working well in spatial canvases, what's not working well, we're starting to get very consistent answers over the last several months from people who are working in it. And I think there's probably some writing to do to kind of compile that into one place of like, here's what we're finding spatial canvases to be good for. But to your point of kind of replacing the desktop and that kind of stuff, I had there was a spatial canvas which also offered video conferencing and like WebKit or web views inside the spatial canvas, and then like, you know, multimedia, you could do images and that kind of stuff. Open source that I stumbled across. I was actually working with about a year ago, and they had real-time collaboration as well. So they were building a real-time collaborative sync layer. And they just built a spatial canvas to show off the real-time collaborative sync layer. But I was using the spatial canvas, and I went to one of the things I did was spend several days trying to do as much of my work as possible inside that spatial canvas. And it's amazing how your brain starts to remap very quickly, and you start getting frustrated with like, why can't I zoom out on my freaking desktop? Like, what the heck? Why is there like a fixed view here? Why can't I just drag things around and have arbitrary windows and have different rooms that I can like throw things in? And then the other thing that is really neat is, as I have gone back to that, I saved some of my rooms from that I worked in for like an entire day or 2 days or 3 days from that canvas. I can go back to those rooms and everything is where it was. Like the browser windows that I was looking at are still there. The notes I wrote as I was going, the sticky notes are still there. It's amazing. It's like that feeling you have when you work at a whiteboard all day and like paste things on the wall and that kind of stuff. But imagine being able to go back to that whiteboard and that the exact same thing pasted on the wall a year later. Talk about a mind palace. Like, it's a really interesting experience. And so I'm hopeful for technology like Kosmik to enable that experience for other people as well, because I found it to be really captivating. We just need it to be like production ready. So great work, Paul. Keep it up and let us know.
Thank you.
Let Boris and I know how we can help. Let us, the group, know how we can help you. We want to see 1,000 flowers bloom and 1,000 spatial canvases bloom as well. So awesome work. Charles is up next. I have a little slide for him as well, since I'll throw that up there while I do a quick intro. Screen share. Here we go. Cool. So Charles I stumbled across Charles's work through a spatial canvas called Birch Inc. You can go check that one out. It's a programmable canvas, so in the vein of like Fermat and Natto and some other things that you've Natto presented last month actually. And I was particularly interested to have Charles come and talk based on a blog post he wrote a month or two ago about why, basically his experience working, reflecting on working with Birch Inc. And talking about what worked well, what didn't work well, what he would work on in the future, and that kind of stuff. And I really value, as we've already had the conversation about like what's working well with spatial canvases, that may or may be not what he spends time talking about today, but that's what kind of caught my eye of Charles's creating cool stuff on the internet and writing about it and reflecting on it in a way that I think is really helpful for us as a group to learn from. So anyway, without further ado, Charles, I'll let you take it away.
Thanks. Yeah, amazing stuff from Paul, of course. Yeah, so I guess Jess summed it up. I was working on this app called Birch. Let's see, let me give you a little bit more background. I left my job 10 months ago or so. I was working on a programming language for a bit. That was fun. And then I decided I wanted to try to make something that could theoretically make money in the future. So worked on an app, which is Birch. And I've been taking a step back from Birch over the last 2 months or so, doing reading, got into tools for thought, coincidentally. So I'm happy to be talking here. Oh, I have slides. Let me try to. I don't have very many slides, so don't be scared. Okay, so we got Birch. We talked about that. I want to talk a little about coffee. Over the pandemic, I got really obsessed with watching coffee YouTube videos. And I don't even love coffee. Like I like coffee, but I just got fascinated by all of the mechanics, the physics of it, and chemistry behind everything. So flash forward to a few weeks ago, and I was watching the 2022 Barista World Championships. And the winner of the 2022 Barista World Championships had a really interesting kind of talk that I thought I could use, like pull an analogy to Birch, and I guess to this talk. So I'll go ahead and do that. He was talking about how when you're at a coffee tasting and a barista like prepares a drink for you. By the way, in the Barista World Championships, they like prepare 3 drinks and they give them to judges, and they have like a monologue, a speech while they're doing this whole thing. It's very impressive. They're very good at it. It's fun to watch. But yeah, he was talking about how when you're at a coffee tasting and you get a drink, the barista tells you some tasting notes. They say, okay, this is going to taste like peach and apricot or something. And then you taste the drink and you're like, oh, damn, it does taste like peach. It does taste like apricot. And then there's a moment of like, you've created trust, that you've had this like amazing human connection in that simple like taste palette thing. And I think that's really interesting. He goes on to talk about how, you know, coffee tasting is a point of learning. You're like stepping outside of your comfort zone, tasting something that you've never had before, and like opening your mind to that. And so you have to create an environment where people feel at home and comfortable and cozy enough to be able to step out of their comfort zone. So yeah, I think that coffee is a really complicated thing. There's just like thousands of chemicals that are hitting your tongue when you taste it, and the tasting notes let us like identify certain dimensions that we can compare this complicated thing against. And similarly, we can use this for analyzing cities. Cities are really complicated, but you go to a new city and you can tour around and you can analyze the bike infrastructure. You can analyze, I don't know how many trees there are, and you can think about how this city compares to other things along these dimensions. And I think we can use this for software too. You know, Birch is a piece of software that I worked a lot on. I thought about a lot, and there's a lot of decisions that went into it, and a whole lot of ramifications from those decisions. And you know, while trying to present this to you, I wanted to have like certain dimensions which you can use to analyze and think about. So, okay, I'm using a spatial canvas for this, by the way. It's Conopio. I've modified it a little bit. I have key bindings, I think. Yeah, let me get rid of this. I've got key bindings. Let me jump between slides, but okay, I like Conopio. I'll talk about why. But anyways, we've got an overview. I'm going to talk about the tasting notes. I'm going to show you a demo of Birch. Hopefully, demo gods are with me today. We'll see. And I'm going to give you a retrospective. You know, Jess was talking about my qualms about using a spatial canvas, my thoughts about how I can improve Birch, and so we'll talk about that too. And then, yeah, so questions, you can ask me questions anytime. I've got around 20 to 25 minutes of content, and if you can jump in at any time, and I'm happy to answer things. So, okay. So tasting notes, here we go. My main like driving question with my work is how can I make coding easier, which is very amorphous. But the reason why I care about this is because I like to build to think. I think that when you build something, you have like something concrete that you can play with and understand, and maybe it surprises you as you're building it. You didn't expect something to work or didn't work, and you learn over the course of building. And it frustrates me that it's so horrible to build anything nowadays, especially using software. And I'd like it to be much, much easier. And this, I was running a programming language. I was like, okay, I can make programming languages easier, but I'm not going to get paid for it, and it probably won't work. And even if I do, there's still so much challenge regarding production environments and getting things deployed and access to data and stuff. So that was what I was trying to think about and tackle with Birch. Okay. Immediacy, you'll notice there's a lot of there's no animations in Birch. You can directly edit several things. And in fact, I haven't told you what Birch is. These are tasty notes, you'll see it. But the entire thing is like a direct editing of a production environment. So that's just one thing to dwell on. In my mind, craft, here, I'll check this off. Boom. Craft is when you pour your soul and heart into a piece of software. And I'm very motivated by this. I think I want to work on things that I love, and I want to show people that. And hopefully that comes across to some extent when you see Birch. Yeah. Okay, professionalism. Birch is an environment that if it was successful, people would be spending many hours of their day, similar to Paul, how Paul was talking about a web browser, right? You spend a lot of time working in your coding editor, and that is both motivating for me as someone who's trying to write a place where a development environment where people can work, but it's also a lot of responsibility. And I think about you want it to be clean enough that people don't get annoyed by random animations that happen while you're trying to do your daily job, or too much design impulses of having cool drop shadows and things. Maybe it gets confusing. But I also don't want it to be sterile in the way that I think a lot of professional tools are. I don't want to call it anything particular, but all of them are very I don't know, very generic. They all look the same. They're mostly blue. I want there to be something that people can I want users to like to use the tool that I give them. And so
Beep, boop. I am a programmer who cares about Vim bindings, and the text entry should be extremely fast. Thank you.
Me too. Yeah.
As an anti-pattern, right? How do you combine cozy with approachability that goes beyond a certain archetype? Lovely prompt.
Thanks. Yeah. And so coziness, coziness is a part of the description of the talk and means a lot to me. And again, we haven't seen Birch, and you'll see it very soon. But for me, coziness is developing a place where people can be safe and comfortable and kind of drop their professional defense. Their professionalism and coziness are kind of at odds with each other, but I'd like to see them combined, especially when I'm doing work. And the reason why I want people to feel safe and comfortable is because I think that's when they can truly engage with something and play with it, rather than just trying to get out of their anxious mode. Let's solve this problem. They can be comfortable and try things that might not work and explore. And so Canopio, I think, is an example of a tool that does this really well. I'm hiding some of the headers here for the talk, but it's playful. It's got a little guy up here normally, and it kind of it lets me at least just write and enjoy the process of getting thoughts on paper, because I am put onto a more comfortable mode. And so I want to have the same thing going with Birch. All right. So yeah, what is it over here? Nothing. That's the whole slides. Nice. I'll show you Birch. Here's the landing page. What do we got? We got a cat here sleeping. That's trying to be cozy. We got some hand-drawn stuff with some colors. I'm trying to be a little playful with this. Hyperbole, ridiculously user-friendly. Coding has never been more fun. World's best coffee. I'm trying to put people at ease. Get get them excited about using the tool. And also, I used to have a tasting note minimalism that I dropped because I didn't want to talk too much about the tasting notes, but it is a little minimal. And especially if you compare it to something like, I think MongoDB is a safe bet because it's been so successful, but like, look how much, if you want to go and use Mongo, like, where do I start? Where do I get an open source thing? You just scroll forever and then you have links at the bottom. It's like there's so many things. And here there's one button, maybe two, but it's one big one and we can try it now and we're using it, right? This is the tool. So I think part of like the coziness, keeping people feeling safe is that it has to be easy to use. And that's a hard thing to do. I'm not sure I did it so well, we'll see, but yeah. Oh, speaking of which, I'm talking about tasting notes and stuff. I don't want this to be like, oh, look at this finely crafted piece of software. It's so perfect. Like this is a work in progress. I just stopped working on it and it has bugs and stuff and it has things that I would change. And so, yeah, I want to show you the whole complicated mess of it all, not just something on a platter. All right, here's Birch. This is a canvas. We've got 3 things that we can put on this canvas. I'll right click on the background and we get an option to choose between 3 of them. We can create a function, we can create a table, and we can create a timer. Here's a function. This is another one. Got another table over here, and we'll talk about timers later. So, we've got this function, we can run it. The return value pops up below it. This is an example of a place where spatial canvases were a little challenging because I have like more data that I want to show a user. Where do I put it? Well, I guess I could put it below the card, and then I could have put it like outside of the spatial canvas. I could have put it on the spatial canvas and had values there. I don't know. I'm not even saying this was the best way to do it, but it's what I arrived at. Okay. Let's see, this is a new number. It calls numbers.push. Numbers is defined here. It's a table. We add a random mathematical value and we can do this. Speaking of limits of spatial canvases, this table is expanding in length. And now I have to like lay out my stuff. Okay, so yeah, we can put numbers in a table. Sweet. Let me get rid of this table. We don't need this function anymore. Oh yeah, you right click on a function and you can also run it. Same thing as pressing this. You can copy the function as curl. So we haven't talked about this yet, but unlike NATO, like a different design decision that went into this is that these functions are running on a server. They're not running in the client. So we can copy this function as a curl. We can close the tab that I was on, open a terminal, paste the curl, and it returns null because that function doesn't return anything. Let me make a new function. We can run it by hand, we can run it here, we get hello back. Awesome. What else? We can also copy it as fetch. So we can, plop it into some JavaScript and get hello back. So a big thing that I ran into, well, like I'm building a thing, I'm working with a technology. Who is this technology for? Like at some point I want to productize what I'm building and it's not really clear. Is it for somebody who wants to build a backend using these primitives? Is it for someone who wants to hit a bunch of APIs and do some scripting? I didn't have an answer and I would have had to choose a path, I think, to make the product tailored to the person using it. So let me just quickly, before we dive into more of that, talk about timers. We can say like every second, create a new number. And you see it starts running it even when it's not syntactically correct, but it's creating new numbers as we speak. And this is all running on a server. We can close the tab, wait a little bit, open the tab back up, go to the end, and it's created some more numbers in the meantime. So yeah, timers useful sometimes. I don't know. Yeah, okay, let's talk about use cases. Okay, well, we can directly edit this. This is kind of like part of the immediacy thing. We can give it a new name. We can, like in the same way, you can edit these function names and stuff. It doesn't pop up a dialog and say what you want the function's name to be, what you want the space's name to be. We only have so many function executions each month. There's currently no way to get more. You can just email me and I will increment your number, but I don't think that you should use this also. Okay, we can log in. Is this gonna work? Bad. Okay, we can log in. Here we go. We can look at, here's like a app that I wrote using Birch. You can kind of see like, yeah, I don't know. The reason, so I stopped working on Birch primarily because I thought the Spatial Canvas was not a good tool for laying out code. And you know, I might even in the future continue working on something like Birch, but without the Spatial Canvas. I think there's some interesting things here with like, yeah, we can talk about that too. But like, it's kind of, there's a lot going on here. It doesn't like initially, but maybe I'm just bad at organizing things on a Spatial Canvas, but it doesn't really like make me feel like I know where to dive in to the code. I can start reading anywhere and try to like get a sense, but there's no, unlike Nado, which has like lines of saying this function depends on this function, anything here is in scope for anything else. Which, you know, works really well when you have 4 functions, right? When you, or 3 functions and you are just trying to like, I don't know. It's nice to be able to see your data right next to your functions and even organize them a little bit. But once you get to a larger application, what does this do, by the way? It hits a finance API and converts converts between, yeah, GPB, Great British Pound, and US dollars, and sends me an email if it's over a certain price. So this would be like if you wanted to use Birch as a scripting environment. Let me show you another example. Here's some weather. We've got some headlines that we fetch from api.weather.gov and for the state of New York. And this is running every hour. We can run it manually. We can use California instead. Get different headlines. Didn't work. Well, demo gods, we still have the New York headlines. Here's some California headlines. Weird. Okay, yeah, so what would I do in the future? I guess there's no versioning here right now. There's undo, redo, but I can't see a list of versions, so that's definitely a feature that I want to have. I think that instead of a canvas, I would just like have a list of functions and have a list of tables. And maybe a canvas of like being able to see your tables and functions laid out. Maybe a graph like logsec has this cool graph. Something like this could be a view onto that data. But one of the biggest issues, like you saw the table getting bigger, like functions get bigger too. If you go back and rewrite functions, then you have to go and lay out your whole, you know, your whole app and manually, which is not good. So you could imagine having, I don't know, the headline of a function and then having the body come up separately or pop up only when you're editing it. Yeah, maybe that could work. I wasn't convinced necessarily. One thing I did to try to make it better is I made this like snap to grid. I don't know if I can pop it up a little bit. Like when you drag something, it makes sure that it always aligns to this grid. I think that was a big win for usability because it made things look cleaner. It was very hard. Yeah. And this kind of like it snaps the grid there if the function's name is long, but if the body is long, it also snaps to a grid. So there's like fancy JavaScript going in and measuring things and making sure that everything is, yeah, I don't know. Snapping things to grid makes me happy. What else? Oh, yeah. So for a scripting environment, this is completely live. You're editing functions that are running potentially. Someone could be curling your function. That doesn't work well if you're using it as a backend. I would want to have some sort of like staging environment where you're directly editing a staging environment and then you have a button push to prod, because otherwise, if you have an edit state that is not valid, someone will come and try to use that code while it's not working. But I think with the staging environment, the live editing is pretty sweet. I'd like to see more of that in the future, though, like not having to do deploys to just have something that's running, I think is nice to have. Yeah, let me see. I talked about the design. I like the design. I like the fact that it's easy to edit. I don't know, do people have questions? Oh, I want to show you one more thing before questions. Sure. Is a vision for tool. This is just unrelated to Birch, but regarding tools for thinking. like you got a spatial canvas and iPad, you have things set up, you're using Canopio, you're using any kind of spatial canvas tool. It's kind of small. It's like this rectangle, right? I was using a bunch of Post-it notes for this talk, and it was very fun. This is my first time using Post-it notes in serious depth, and I highly recommend it. So, yeah.
Nice demo, Charles. That is really interesting stuff that you're exploring with Birch. Cool. Anybody got any questions for Paul? There's been a lot. Charles, you might, or any questions for Charles? Charles, you also might scroll through the chat. There's been a lot of, you're definitely sparking a lot of ideas from people. Very active conversation in the chat about, oh, what if we did this? Has people looked into this? This reminds me of that. So some good questions there. But yeah, feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself if you have questions. While people are thinking about what to ask here and while you're browsing, Charles, this definitely, I think I already introduced or like mentioned to you about Valtown, and you're already in touch with Steve Krause. But there's a product called a project called val.town that is very similar to this without the spatial canvas, basically. In many ways, you can, it's like writing these simple little functions that you can hit via an API and that you can curl against and fetch from and that kind of thing. And it also has timer functionality too. Like there's a lot of similar things here. So.
Yeah, Steve and I found each other pretty, well, I guess we kind of already knew each other. And then we found out we were both working on similar things and we're talking along the way. So that was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, Valtown is cool. You should check it out. Yeah. Does Birch support dependent variables? I'm not really sure what that means. Like incremental kind of stuff, like when one variable changes, you have a function that is applied to the variable, right? No, there's no incrementality. You can run things on a second timer or half-second timer, I think. No. I don't know. Maybe I would do that in the future. I think my initial thought was like get something working with simpler mechanisms first and then try to think about incrementality.
Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm wondering, since we are speaking about how Spatial Canvas can be good or bad in terms of workflows, like Charles, don't you think that Birch could be kind of like a scratch pad for developer? Like maybe you wouldn't build your whole app into Birch, but maybe kind of like Kosmik can be good for mood boarding, like maybe it can be good for code mood boarding, and then you can move to something else. Or how, because if you build it, it's because there is something there that is interesting and valuable. And when I look at that, like I'm not a developer by trade, I know how to code a bit, but I'm not a developer by trade, but it seems so approachable. And I would love to learn to code in such an environment. Like an EDE is very frightening for a non-developer. This is very approachable.
Yeah, that was a third use case, is like for education and getting started with coding. And I was clearly, I don't know if this came across, but I was thinking about this a lot while writing Birch. Like one thing that I didn't show that I wanted to, so let me do that now, is, you know, you have a function and then you want to await like on, like, let's say you want to call an RPC or, you know, hit an API, you like await undo something. And it like tells that there's an await in your function body and it makes it async. This was a compromise that I arrived at because I really, really, really don't want to tell beginner people about async await. Like, I think that's the worst possible introduction. Like, you want to do anything? Let me tell you about async. Let me tell you, right? Like, terrible.
Awful.
Yeah. And you know, it's impossible to hit an API without in JavaScript without that's not entirely true. That's not entirely true. You'd think it's impossible to hit an API in JavaScript without awaiting on it. But what one thing that I was working on is I was so the way that this works, I didn't talk about the backend at all. Let me do that a little bit. The way this works is that there's a Deno process there's a Sinatra server that's serving Birch, and whenever somebody wants to run something, it shells out to Deno with a file that is just a stitch together of every function in the space and handles to the tables. And Deno has an FFI, and you can use Rust in this FFI, and Rust can do like has a hack, like you can you can make you can make a synchronous HTTP request in Rust, which you can't do in JavaScript. And so for a while, I was trying to get it to work so that people could like make HTTP requests by like synchronously in JavaScript, because there's not doing anything else. It's just one function. It doesn't matter if you're blocking the loop. But it was hard and I did not succeed. So
Cameron, do you want me to read out what your question, or unmute and ask it yourself?
I can ask it. Hey Charles, I really enjoyed this demo. I was curious, were you picturing using it more for one-off explorations or to develop apps that you would revisit repeatedly? I feel like this ties back to some of the earlier discussion around making a scratch pad versus a long-lived app.
Yeah. I didn't think about it as a scratch pad. I mean, I did think about it as like sort of like exploring and playing, and maybe that's scratch paddy. But my real goal was I have like a finance spreadsheet that every time I like have to go and keep track of data whenever I make a transaction and put it into my finance spreadsheet. And I have a script that runs against it and calculates a number each month. And this was like the motivating case for Birch, is that I don't want to use like Google Forms plus Google Sheets plus Google Apps Scripts can do everything that Birch does. But then you have to like learn 3 tools and understand how they work together. And it's not just all in one space. And Birch's like proposal was having like everything that you need to build a form app with like dynamic stuff happening in one canvas. I didn't end up adding forms, but this was definitely part of the vision for it. And I think forms are really, really cool, and people should do more with forms. Yeah.
Makes sense. Thank you.
Amy, would you like to unmute and ask your question?
Hi, I'm a non-coder, and one idea that came to mind was the concept of adding a subdivision for operators and control flow statements and things like that as a smaller kind of thing that can be attached to these boxes, because like this looks very inspiring to me. The challenge is I wouldn't know to use the await, or wouldn't know what my palette of available options in the situation might be. So just the idea of not coming up with these operators or control flow statements like from my mind, it would enable like immense utility to people. So these can be added as boxes inside the function boxes, and then it can take the shape it might want. Just a suggestion or a question if you've thought of that.
Yeah, there's various like node and pipe style editors. Maybe that's what you're getting to, where you can have values that like combine with operators that are all on the canvas. I think that's interesting. I basically didn't have anything to add to that area. So I was trying to explore like, what if we put text code on the canvas and see, but I think, so I wasn't really thinking about that, but it's cool. Yeah.
And I think I saw a question from Carson as well. You're free to unmute it if you want, or unmute and ask, or I'll ask it for you if you want me to.
Really cool demo, Charles. You mentioned your motivation being making it easier to work with like financial spreadsheet, for example. How might you improve or change Birch to make it easier to work with data of that kind directly in the editor?
Yeah. I'm not really sure. So the way that Birch tables work, I didn't actually say this, maybe it's worth saying, is that they have the same interface as JavaScript arrays. So you can iterate over them, you can index into them, etc. I could show this. And they're dynamically typed, right? You can put anything you want. Didn't work. Headlines is not helpful today. Let's get a new one. Well, maybe they're not. Who knows what their interface is? But yes, I don't like this array interface. I don't think it's the easiest way for teaching people. It was like easy to me because I know arrays, but actually I was talking to someone who was like, children can understand arrays. Like children can understand lists, they can understand lots of data structures, but arrays are like with mutable pointers and stuff are like really complicated. And I don't think that the array like as a table, it was kind of like easy. If you know JavaScript, you can like use it. But yeah, I don't know. I think getting better databases is a really interesting and complicated topic. I am kind of motivated by like Prolog things. And like, I think that the way that I want a database to work is I want to be able to say, here is a piece of data, here is a piece of data, here is a piece of data. And then I want to analyze, because I think that's like a really simple thing. Like, oh, I don't have to create a schema and stuff and set up tables and do a bunch of stuff. I just want to like hand you data and then I want to get that data later. I don't know if that makes it easier for finance. Yeah.
Hilariously, I think the closest that I still come to this today, again, without being a coder, is on the fly named YAML front matter attributes in Jekyll and Liquid, and logsec also has attributes. So I do non-coder style slicing and dicing, aka a database and relations, and I really like that on the fly nature. And I think there's a lot of opportunities to make that experience even better and more accessible and performant. It's a good direction.
Daniel, I saw you had your hand up and then you no longer have your hand up. You.
Yeah, I think we clarified it. So I mean, I would call that kind of dependent variables minus the reactivity, basically. Is that accurate?
I don't know what dependent variables means.
A variable that is an input to one card that is the output of another card, you could say. It looks like you're taking the output, notwithstanding the issues you point out with array access, that you're able to either read or maybe mutate values from one card in another. Is that accurate?
There's not a tying from data to cards, but there are these global stores, that global within a space stores that you can mutate and add to. So you could treat them like that if you wanted to. You could say this function is writing to this table and this function is going to read from that table. But there's nothing quite so hierarchical. Yeah, but that sounds cool. Yeah.
Awesome. So Charles, what do you, well, we talked a little bit already about, fortunately, most of your talk was about what are spatial canvases good for and not good for, but to ask Boris's question, what are you working on next and how can we support you in it?
Oh man, I don't know what I'm working on next. I got into reading various blogs about, the wonderful thing about the Tools for Thought space is that everybody has these like handcrafted amazing blogs. So that's been addictive. Been doing research, reading some books. I'm really, I don't know. Let me talk about Dynamic Land. I think Dynamic Land is awesome, and people are way underselling it, sort of. Maybe I will do something like that. That's kind of like, I like the fact that my desk is so much bigger than a monitor in terms of a spatial canvas, and I can like move cards around. There's emergent behavior happening just because of the physics of it all. And so people should check this out. I don't know. I'm not working on this. I don't know what I'm going to work on. But
I think we're at like 14 months away, a year away from Apple releasing a headset. And so again, talking about what was used to be hard might become easy. That's a direction that I would encourage people to think about. There may also be an iPhone moment where early apps can create escape velocity. It's also an extremely hard space. So I, also completely discount everything that I'm saying at the same time. But I think it's one of those things that that could be really interesting. I expect Apple to essentially do AR virtual desktops in combination with some of their other monitors. It will be an amazing canvas for building other things in product. And we have very little people with either UI or code experience in how to make this work. Most of them live in gaming, which is a completely different community. Anyway, so what if dynamic land in 14 months in lots of spaces?
Is that a question? I'm very on board with everything you've said.
Great, go for it.
Yeah.
I'm in. So how do we support you doing that?
I don't know.
What we're basically gonna keep asking people, like, so there's already people in the comments who are like, come work for me. So that'll happen on these calls. And I think the other thing is that that in general, with things like Open Collective or other things like that, we're really trying to encourage people voting in part with dollars. That we want to support people in doing things, especially people who are doing things in a way that isn't just formal employment. Right? So how can you buy your own time back is perhaps one of those things. Or how can you buy other people's time? If you don't need to get paid or don't want to get paid, could that be something that adds more equity? It's one of the challenges that we have in this space, in this community. We actually need to make it a lot more equitable and a lot more diverse. And one of those is giving other people the financial security to experiment. So that's a whole other discussion that we should host at some point. Orion, you had a long question. Do you want me to read it for you? You can just type at me if you want me to do that. Yes, Orion says, is part of what made Spatial Canvases interesting for code representation its non-linearity. In a source code file, you are forced to have a total ordering of elements, variables, functions, etc. Even when you want to express doesn't need that ordering. This escapes the need to arbitrarily sort things. I often find myself thinking, oh, this function is more important, so let's put it at the top of the section. And oh, these two are kind of related, so I'll reorder these functions to make them closer. 2, there's also a clear one-to-one mapping from objects, could be functions, variables, literatures, etc., to 2D geometry, which can lead to more granular objects that would otherwise be trapped in larger referential objects, e.g. JavaScript source file. And this opens the door to more diverse organization of program representation.
Yeah, for the second part, totally. There are very cool ways. That's one of the cool things about a canvas is that you can just put anything on it. And I thought timers were an example where I was like, this is normally something that is just happening without being able to see what's happening, without being able to know that there is something happening, and being able to see it there is very valuable. Other examples are like a web server that's serving on a port, or basically any process. Like you could imagine a spatial canvas for a OS that shows you everything that's going on there. That'd be very cool. And so I agree that there's 2D representations of all sorts of objects. For code representation, it's nonlinearity. I think that, I don't know. I think that you can have nonlinearity in other situations where you just aren't working in a file. So if you have one function per file, you have a similar sort of disassociation between things.
I mean, for those folks who don't do a lot of coding, I think what Orion's getting at here and what Charles is kind of grappling with too is that there are sort of patterns that are emergent within a code base of there's certain things that happen over here, certain things that happen over here. And one of the things when you're exploring a code base is to get your head around that. And certain frameworks and that kind of stuff have patterns that are well understood of oh, this kind of stuff lives over here in these files. This kind of stuff lives over here in these files. And generally this stuff calls this, but this does not call that. And if you've been in a code base or a framework for a while, or those patterns start to kind of become ingrained, but they're really spatial patterns. They actually are this set of things is related to this set of things in a specific way. They happen to mostly be files that live in folders and that's the way that we explore them in our IDE. But that's sort of like just one view on the relationship between those things. GitHub Next has actually done some work on like exploring code bases and visualizing them. I don't know that I've thought about that in relationship to spatial canvases, but it would be a good thing to go check out. I think it's Amelia Wattenberger did like some of the work on it. There's a GitHub Next article on it. If you go to githubnext.com, I'll find the link. But there are, I don't think one of the things I love about Charles, the work that you've done on Birch Inc. and like the blog post that you wrote and you're sharing this talk today is like, you're basically like, I tried a bunch of stuff and I spent a lot of time working on this, like 8 months of my life, and it didn't work. And so like, this is one of the cases where we need like the null hypothesis journal of like, I did all of these tests and it didn't work. And like saying what didn't work is just as valuable for exploring the design space as, hey guys, this one worked. Figma just sold to, Adobe for $20 billion. Like we just as much need the like, hey guys, I've been over there. Here's, you can go over there too, but before you go over there, you should know the following things. So I appreciate your like sharing what you've learned here. But I think what we're also illustrating is that we haven't yet figured out what the paradigm is for spatial code representation. Like there's a reason we still use IDEs primarily. And a lot of people have done a lot of exploration around this. You can like go all the way back to things like, Smalltalk, for like the way that spatial code snippets were laid out, and the way that they did a semi-structured editor of like having the stuff at the top and then the sort of the spatial editor alongside it. But we haven't figured it out yet. It is a really hard problem. But it seems like there is something there. Like there is a spatial relationship that emerges within code bases, and Amelia's work does a great job of like actually visualizing that. And you can like see a very clear pattern that emerges across different frameworks. So
one of the challenges is like maintaining that spatial thing as the code is evolving to where it is. So like maybe the spatial that you think you're going to do when you start, starting your code base changes over time, and then you have to think about how it changes.
Yes. And we actually had a conversation in the chat about this as well, of like, one of the big challenges everyone has said about spatial canvases that has come the last several months is maintaining the layout. It's the flexibility of the layout is amazing. It's so great to be able to just throw things around, but over time, like you start to feel the weight of that, of needing to maintain it, and things grow and change. And now you have to like move all of these things down. And it's just like, it starts to feel like the weight that your desk feels like when it gets really dirty. And yet these are digital things, right? So it shouldn't feel that weighty, but it starts to feel that way. And so one of the things we're talking about is like, how do we enable this idea of sort of multiple views of a spatial canvas? I actually do want to control the layout for this one view, and I kind of want to save that, but I want to take the same items and rearrange them in a different view. Or I want the computer to try do its best to do like a force directed layout or something along those lines, and then switch back to my layout. So like there's some exploration needed there, in terms of yeah, that's all I have to say. But
yeah,
one more round of applause.
Woo!
Let's we hit 10:30. These things are always long and always awesome. Amazing chat. I'm getting lots of private chats as well on a couple of different topics. Notice that we mainly have lots of Twitter handles. I would really, really encourage people, just like my comment about VR, there is a moment happening, a kind of thermocline around the Fediverse and ActivityPub. So I encourage everyone to dip their toe in the water. It might feel like a bit of a distraction for a week or so, but I'm getting very strong, like it's happening vibes. And I think this fits with these communities, and this is the kind of open protocol that's richer than RSS, shall we say, that might flow some things back and forth. And yeah, love to jam on our Logsec, our Mastodon, or anything else. You know where to find us on the internet. Feel free to email us directly on the notes that you get from Luma. And let's share resources and support each other. what's got anything next on the docket? Jess?
We'll probably do one more spatial canvas in December and then kind of see where we go from there. There's just so many of these and there's been some interesting stuff that's come up. So TL draw potentially, maybe a TL draw plugin. TL draw promises to be the spatial canvas to end all spatial canvases, and I hope they're successful. All right.
Awesome.
Cool. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you. Bye.